If you've ever replaced spark plugs in your car, there's a good chance you've installed a brand that may be shortening your engine's lifespan without you realizing it. This is one of those silent problems that doesn't trigger a warning light on the dashboard, doesn't cause immediate failure, but slowly begins to increase fuel consumption, cause minor malfunctions, and wear down expensive internal components. And the worst part is that most drivers never imagine that the source of all this could be a part that costs just a few dollars. Today, I'm going to show you 7 spark plug brands that many mechanics completely avoid, not out of personal opinion, but due to a real pattern of problems observed in the workshop over the years. Some of these brands are very popular, others promise extra performance, and some even carry traditional names that inspire confidence. Even so, they are behind countless cases of ignition failure, high fuel consumption, and incorrect diagnoses that end up costing dearly in the future. And at the end of the video, I'll also show you 2 brands that virtually every experienced mechanic trusts, used as a standard by major manufacturers, and that simply work well for a long time without creating unpleasant surprises. If you want to protect your engine, save money on maintenance, and avoid invisible headaches, this video can save you from a mistake that many people only realize when it's already too expensive to fix. Autolite. Autolite is a brand that many people have known for decades, especially those who have owned classic American cars. For a long time, it was synonymous with reliability. The problem is that this has changed, and almost no one has noticed. Today, the biggest risk with Autolite isn't the brand itself, but the cheaper lines that have flooded the market. They seem correct to install, the engine starts normally, everything works fine for the first few days, and that's exactly what makes the spark plug dangerous. The wear, and tear starts early. Very early. After a few thousand miles, the electrode begins to lose its shape, the spark weakens, and the engine starts burning the mixture unevenly. The driver almost never notices it immediately. The car keeps running, but with small, invisible faults. What happens next is classic in a workshop. First comes the silent increase in fuel consumption, then slight hesitation at idle. Next, intermittent misfires under light acceleration. By the time the owner realizes something is wrong, the ignition system has already been malfunctioning for weeks. And here's the serious problem. Modern engines are extremely sensitive to spark quality. A spark plug that loses efficiency not only causes misfires, but also begins to overload coils, stress sensors, and in some cases, damage the catalytic converter with unburned fuel. I've seen dozens of cases where the only cause was simple: Autolite economy. Spark plugs installed in engines that required precision. Another critical point is the inconsistency in manufacturing. 2 spark plugs from the same box can behave differently. One works fine, the other starts to fail early. For a mechanic, this is a nightmare because the problem appears and disappears without apparent logic. Autolite still works well in older, simpler, low-demand engines. But in modern cars, especially those with direct injection, turbocharging, or advanced electronic management, that's a choice I, as a mechanic, simply avoid. Practical summary. Autolite doesn't usually break down the motor immediately, but it creates exactly the kind of problem that it takes a long time to appear, it's expensive later, and it's almost never diagnosed quickly. And that's the kind of mistake nobody wants to make. Just to save a few dollars on a part that costs less than a tank of fuel. Champion is one of those brands that almost everyone has heard of. Present in old manuals, used in factories decades ago, recommended by generations of mechanics. This creates an automatic feeling of trust. And that's exactly why she became dangerous today. The biggest problem with the Champion League isn't historical, it's current. In recent years, the brand has undergone profound changes in production and outsourcing. Many of the candles sold today are no longer manufactured with the same quality control standards that built the brand's reputation in the past, and the effect of this becomes apparent quickly in the workshop. One of the most common problems I see with modern Champion spark plugs is spark instability. The spark plug works fine when cold, but starts to fail after the engine warms up. Irregular idling, slight vibrations, loss of response at low RPMs. The driver almost always thinks it is coil fuel injector, nozzle sensor, or even a fuel problem, and then he starts replacing expensive parts. When in reality, the problem lies in something simple. The spark plug doesn't maintain a stable spark under high temperatures. Another critical point is actual durability. On the packaging, many Champion products promise a long lifespan. In practice, several lines begin to degrade in half the expected time. The electrode wears out quickly, the gap widens, and the spark progressively loses intensity. This creates a silent problem. The engine continues to run, but begins to operate outside of optimal efficiency. Increased fuel consumption, higher emissions, and increased internal heat. In modern engines, this is not a minor detail. It's a direct risk to the catalytic converter, valves, and coils. Now comes the most dangerous part. Champion still appears as an original specification in some older engines. Many people assume that any Champion engine will fit any modern car, and that's a serious technical error. Modern engines require extremely precise spark fast response time, high thermal resistance. And several Champion lines simply weren't designed for that level of demand. Direct summary, Champion is not a bad brand in the past. But today, in modern cars, it has become inconsistent, less durable, and technically outdated in several applications. It doesn't usually cause immediate failure, but it creates exactly the kind of problem that confuses diagnosis, prolongs defects, and it makes you spend money trying to fix something that started with a low-cost part. And when a candle is cheap, but causes hundreds of dollars in maintenance later, that's no longer saving money. Torch. If you've ever bought very cheap spark plugs online from marketplaces or generic stores, you've almost certainly come across Torch. This is a brand that has grown aggressively in recent years by offering extremely low prices, and this doesn't happen by chance. The problem with Torch starts at the base of its manufacturing. A large part of these spark plugs come from production lines with very wide tolerances, which in practical terms means something dangerous. Two spark plugs from the same box can be technically different from each other. In modern engines, this is a silent disaster. The first classic defect of these spark plugs doesn't appear as an immediate failure, but as a variation in internal resistance. Some spark plugs generate a strong spark, others a weak one, and the engine starts working with cylinders burning the mixture at different levels. The result is a rough engine, slight vibrations, subtle power loss, and higher fuel consumption without a clear explanation. The driver continues driving like this for weeks or months, straining coils and overloading the entire ignition system without realizing it. The problem is exacerbated because many Torch spark plugs have a frequent history of structural defects in the ceramic insulator. Internal micro cracks, invisible to the naked eye, begin to expand as the engine heats up, allowing electrical current to leak into the spark plug body. This generates intermittent failures that are extremely difficult to diagnose, and in many cases ends up directly damaging the coil. I have seen coils burn out more than once, not due to a defect of their own, but because they were constantly working with defective Torch spark plugs. At higher RPMs, another defect appears. The center electrode does not always maintain perfect alignment, and the spark begins to escape to the wrong points inside the chamber. This creates continuous irregular combustion, small detonations, increased temperature, and premature wear of valves and pistons, all happening without any clear warning on the dashboard. The most critical point is that Torch often copies codes and references from premium brands. Many spark plugs are sold as compatible with NGK, Denso, or Bosch, but they don't exactly respect the heat range, correct length, or ideal electrode position. A minimal error here completely changes the combustion chamber temperature. And in a modern engine, the wrong temperature means a real risk of damage in the medium term. To summarize honestly and technically, Torch is not just a low-quality spark plug, it's an unpredictable one. You don't know what spark it will generate, how long it will last, or how it will affect the engine after a few months. It might work today and start causing silent damage tomorrow, and this is exactly the type of part that doesn't break down quickly, but takes its toll later. Agdelco. Agdelco is a brand that inspires almost automatic confidence. Directly linked to General Motors, present as original equipment in millions of vehicles and known in workshops for decades, it carries a very strong reputation. The problem begins when this reputation is used out of context. In recent years, AC Delco has started selling several universal economy lines in the aftermarket, and these spark plugs do not follow the same standard as the true OEM versions. Many people buy them believing they are installing the same spark plug used in the factory, when in reality they are installing a simplified version with cheaper materials, inferior quality control, and generic specifications that do not always exactly respect what the engine requires. The classic flaw in these economy spark plugs appears insidiously. The spark plug works well initially. The engine starts perfectly. idles smoothly, no sign of trouble. After a few thousand kilometers, small misfires begin under light load, mainly during acceleration and uphill driving, accompanied by a subtle increase in fuel consumption. These spark plugs do not maintain adequate thermal stability in modern engines, overheating and wearing out the electrode quickly. The result is an unstable spark that confuses the engine management system, overloads coils, and creates intermittent faults that are extremely difficult to diagnose. In turbocharged or direct injection engines, this can even generate constant mild pre-ignition, increasing internal temperature and accelerating valve and seat wear without any warning lights coming on in the dashboard. The most dangerous aspect is the false sense of security. Because the AC Delco name is associated with original equipment, many car owners blindly trust these universal spark plugs and never imagine that they could be the source of future problems. The genuine OEM versions of AC Delco are excellent, but the budget lines are a silent trap. They don't break the engine quickly, they don't cause immediate serious failure, but they create exactly the kind of defect that appears months later, is expensive to fix, and is almost never associated with the wrong spark plug installed earlier. And this is the kind of mistake that transforms a simple, inexpensive replacement into a series of completely unnecessary expenses. E3 Spark Plugs. E3 is a brand that markets itself as having advanced technology, exclusive design, and almost guaranteed performance gains. The different electrode shape, the promise of more efficient combustion, and advertisements suggesting more power and fuel economy create an extremely attractive image, especially for those who like to take good care of their car. The problem is that, in practice, the vast majority of engines were not designed to work with this type of spark geometry. In modern engines, the ignition system, combustion timing, and ideal spark position are calculated with extreme precision. When you drastically change the electrode shape, you also change the behavior of the flame inside the chamber, and this rarely brings real benefits outside of very specific applications. The classic problem with E3 engines manifests as erratic performance over time. Initially, the engine often seems to respond well, but after a few thousand kilometers, slight fluctuations in idle speed, loss of smoothness at low RPMs, and slightly higher fuel consumption begin to appear. The multi-electrode system tends to accumulate deposits more easily, especially in urban use, and the spark starts to form at different points in each cycle. This generates inconsistent combustion, almost imperceptible microfaults, and increased emissions without the driver immediately noticing. In sensitive engines, this behavior also overloads coils and creates confusing readings for oxygen sensors, leading to incorrect diagnoses and unnecessary parts replacement. The biggest problem with the E3 is the promise it fails to consistently deliver on. On a dynamometer, the advertised gains almost never materialize. In real-world use, the opposite is frequently seen: loss of stability, reduced durability, and more frequent maintenance. It's not a spark plug that will quickly destroy an engine, but it's a spark plug that rarely delivers real advantages and often creates subtle problems that accumulate over time. In short, honestly, the E3 is much more of a marketing ploy than a technical solution. It looks modern, it looks advanced, but for most engines it doesn't improve anything, and often only complicates what was already working perfectly well. Splitfire. Splitfire was one of the most famous brands of the 1990s and early 2000s, known for its split electrode and the promise of a stronger spark, better combustion, and more power. For a long time, this technology seemed revolutionary, and many people still have positive memories of the brand. The problem is that the world of engines has completely changed, and Splitfire is practically stuck in the past. Modern engines work with extremely precise ignition systems, optimized combustion chambers, and sophisticated electronic management. And Splitfire's old design simply doesn't keep up with this evolution. What once seemed like innovation has now become, in practice, a technically outdated solution for most current applications. The most common defect in these spark plugs appears as progressive instability. The split electrode tends to suffer uneven wear, causing the spark to shift position over time. This generates inconsistent combustion, minor misfires during light acceleration, and a loss of smoothness at idle. In urban use, where the engine spends a lot of time at low RPM, this problem is further aggravated by the accumulation of deposits between the electrodes, weakening the spark and increasing fuel consumption for no apparent reason. I've seen countless cases where the driver spent months replacing sensors, cleaning injectors, and testing coils, when in fact the irregular behavior was simply due to abnormally worn split-fire spark plugs. The most delicate point is that this spark plug simply offers no real advantage today. There is no consistent power gain, no proven fuel economy, and no significant increase in durability. What exists is an old design applied to modern engines that demand extreme precision. To put it simply, split-fire doesn't usually destroy engines or cause catastrophic failures, but it creates exactly the kind of problem that reduces efficiency, increases maintenance, and removes smoothness from operation without the owner realizing the true cause. It's a spark plug that has had its time, it has served its purpose in the past, but today it is rarely the best choice for any modern car. Brisk. Brisk is a well-known European brand in the world of racing and tuned engines, which automatically creates an image of high performance and advanced technology. In specific racing applications, some lines really work very well. The problem begins when these spark plugs are used in everyday street cars. Racing engines operate in completely different RPM, temperature, and mixture ranges than engines used in daily driving. When you install a spark plug designed for extreme environments in a city car, the behavior changes completely. What was excellent on the track becomes unstable in traffic at prolonged idles and when using regular fuel. The most frequent defect of standard Brisk spark plugs is excessive sensitivity to operating conditions. These spark plugs do not tolerate fuel of irregular quality, short warm-up cycles, and long periods at low RPMs well. The electrode tends to accumulate deposits quickly, the spark loses stability, and minor misfires begin during acceleration and cold starts. In many cases, the engine starts to exhibit irregular idling and higher fuel consumption without any fault codes being registered. I have seen several perfectly healthy engines exhibit strange behavior simply because they were using Brisk spark plugs unsuitable for urban use, when the engine manufacturer required a much more conservative and stable type. The most dangerous aspect is the false sense of performance. Many people install Brisk spark plugs believing they are improving the engine, when in practice they are only making the ignition system more sensitive and less tolerant to normal day-to-day variations. These spark plugs don't usually cause immediate damage, but they create exactly the kind of instability that reduces smoothness, increases maintenance, and accelerates component wear over time. To put it honestly, Brisks may be excellent in racing engines and very specific applications, but for street cars it rarely offers any real advantage and often creates problems that simply wouldn't exist with a more conventional and well-specified spark plug. After discussing so many problematic brands, it's important to make something very clear. Not all spark plugs are traps. On the contrary, there are extremely reliable brands that have been used as standard by manufacturers worldwide for decades, precisely because they work well, last a long time, and almost never cause headaches. And that's the most valuable part of this video, because avoiding bad brands is important, but choosing the right brand makes a huge difference in engine lifespan, fuel consumption, and the peace of mind of the car owner. Now I'm going to show you two brands that virtually every experienced mechanic trusts, that are used as original equipment by major manufacturers, and that, in the vast majority of cases, simply work as they should, without unpleasant surprises. First recommended brand. NGK is simply the world standard when it comes to spark plugs. Present as original equipment in manufacturers such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, BMW, Volkswagen, Mazda, and many others, it has built its reputation over decades, not with marketing promises, but with extremely precise engineering. The great differentiator of NGK is something that few consumers realize. Each spark plug is specifically designed for a type of engine, respecting exactly the heat range, length, electrode projection, and internal resistance defined by the manufacturer. This ensures that the spark always occurs at the correct point in the combustion chamber, at the ideal intensity, and at the exact moment, something absolutely critical for the efficient and safe operation of modern engines. In practice, the behavior of these spark plugs is exactly what every mechanic wants to see. Easy starts at any temperature, stable idle, smooth. Acceleration, and above all, real durability well above average. It is extremely common to find NGK spark plugs working perfectly after tens of thousands of kilometers, maintaining a strong and uniform spark practically until the end of their lifespan. The electrode material, heat treatment, and rigorous quality control make wear predictable and slow, avoiding those intermittent failures that confuse diagnosis and lead to unnecessary replacement of coils, sensors, or injectors. In modern engines, especially with direct injection or turbo, this stability makes all the difference in protecting expensive components such as catalytic converters and valve systems. The most important point is absolute reliability. NGK rarely disappoints. It simply does what a spark plug should do: generate a perfect spark for the expected time without creating hidden side effects. That's why so many manufacturers choose it as a factory standard and why so many mechanics recommend it almost automatically when someone asks which spark plug to use. In short, if you want a safe, predictable, and technically correct choice, NGK is one of those brands you can install and practically forget exists, knowing that the engine will run as efficiently and healthily as possible for a long time. Second recommended brand, Denso. Denso is one of those brands that works quietly but completely dominates ignition engineering in the modern world. Original equipment for manufacturers such as Toyota, Lexus, Subaru, Mazda, Mitsubishi, and many others, it is responsible for some of the most precise spark plugs ever produced. Denso's great differentiator lies in its extreme manufacturing precision. While many brands work with relatively wide tolerances, Denso produces electrodes with extremely controlled microscopic measurements, especially in the iridium and platinum lines. This allows for an extremely stable spark with lower voltage required from the coils and much more consistent ignition under any temperature, load, or RPM condition. In practice, the behavior of these spark plugs is impressively smooth. Engines with Denso spark plugs usually exhibit extremely regular idling, more linear acceleration response, and slightly lower fuel consumption over time. Another very important point is durability. Denso iridium spark plugs are famous for maintaining virtually constant performance for tens of thousands of kilometers without perceptible spark degradation. This drastically reduces the risk of intermittent failures, protects coils, keeps sensors working within standard parameters, and avoids the silent wear that only appears when the problem has already become expensive. In modern engines, especially those with high compression ratios and direct injection, this stability is simply essential. What makes Denso so respected among mechanics is its absolute predictability. You install it, the engine runs perfectly, and continues to run that way for a long time. There are no surprises, no strange behavior, no problematic batch variations. It's a brand that rarely shows up in fault diagnoses because it simply doesn't create problems. To put it honestly, if NGK is the universal standard, Denso is the standard for extreme precision. For those who want maximum reliability, smooth operation, and total engine protection, Denso is an almost impossible choice to go wrong with. After all this, the main lesson is very simple and extremely important. Spark plugs seem like small, inexpensive parts with little impact, but in practice, they directly influence fuel consumption, performance, engine durability, and even the lifespan of expensive components like coils, catalytic converters, and valves. The problematic brands we saw today rarely cause immediate failures or break the engine all at once, but they create exactly the kind of silent defect that accumulates over time, confuses diagnoses, and transforms a few dollars saved into hundreds or even thousands in future. Maintenance. And this is the kind of damage that almost no one associates with the wrong spark plug installed months ago. At the same time, choosing the right brand completely changes the car experience. Well-designed spark plugs ensure stable ignition, smooth operation, lower fuel consumption, and above all, peace of mind. That's why brands like NGK and Denso have become a global standard. They don't promise miracles, they don't sell exaggerated marketing, but they deliver exactly what the engine needs to function efficiently and safely for a long time. In automotive maintenance, the best choice is almost always not the cheapest or the most eye-catching, but the one that simply works well every day without creating invisible problems. And if there's one thing that's always worth remembering, it's this: saving money on critical parts is almost never a real saving. If you want to protect your engine, your money, and your peace of mind, choose reliable brands and the correct specifications for your car. In future videos, I'll show you other parts that seem harmless but hide serious risks when chosen incorrectly. So if you like to take good care of your car and avoid headaches in the future, it's well worth following the channel.